Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. Oh, this legislative session, though. Enough with it already. Daniel Smith continues to introduce a barrage of legislation that's making some major changes to how Albertans, uh, quite literally in some cases, go about their days. One of those changes we just saw introduced has to do with changes to insurance. Now, the UCP is touting these insurance changes as being, oh, it's going to mean so much cheaper insurance for everybody. There seems to be a lot of reporting that says actually the premiums are going to go up. It's all very, very confusing. To try to make a little bit of sense of this whole thing, we're joined today, and we're very excited to welcome to the show injury lawyer from Edmonton who's been involved in insurance and insurance law for quite some time. Very excited to welcome to the show lawyer Mark McCourt. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Before we get into the whole conversation about the changes, what the changes mean, whether or not the changes are good or bad, if you wouldn't mind just a little bit, if you could introduce yourself to the audience, who is Mark McCourt? What are your credentials? You have a law website. Tell us more.
You betcha. So I graduated from U of A Law School in 1990, and since 1992 I've practiced exclusively personal injury law. First with a different law firm, Braithwaite Boyle, and then I hung up my own shingle, McCourt Law Offices, in 1995, and so almost for the last 30 years I've been practicing auto accident injury law as the chief cook and bottle washer here at McCourt Law Offices.
Okay. And you also have some other side gigs because like you're a columnist, you've written some articles about the subject that we're about to talk about today. Do you want to talk about that for a quick sec?
Sure. Well, since the last provincial election in what was it? I guess the end of May of 23, I have written 8 guest columns on this issue of auto insurance reform, or as I call it, deform. 4 for the Edmonton Journal and 4 for the Calgary Herald, including one in the Journal and one in the Herald earlier this month. Basically, warning Albertans that the election of this Danielle Smith government might be followed in relatively short order by some reforms to the auto insurance system in Alberta that may not be very beneficial for Albertans.
So let's start with where we are right now. So let's say that I am driving to work and all of a sudden I get rear-ended by somebody. What are, or let's just say car accident, because I don't want to get into the nuances of all of the other things, but I get into a car accident where I'm hit by somebody else. I have some injuries from that car accident. What
Yes.
is the process for anybody who hasn't been in a car accident? What is the process from there if my injuries are sufficient that I'm not able to go to work or I'm going to be dealing with chronic pain or anything like that?
You bet. Well, step one would be give me a call. There's no doubt about that. But what I would tell you is I would ask you, okay, where did this accident happen and when did it happen and how did it happen? And if you say I was driving along and I smacked somebody from behind because I was busy texting at the same time, I'd say, you know what? I don't have any more questions for you because it sounds like this accident is your fault. I'm not going to be able to help you because we're in an at-fault auto insurance system. But if the accident is not your fault and you got hurt, then you have the right to bring a claim against the negligent driver's insurance company, the insurance company for the guy that caused the car crash. And that's where I come in. Is That's what I do for a living: is help people who've been injured by reckless drivers recover money from that reckless motorist's car insurance company. Now, I guess I should add, even no matter whose fault the accident is, if you get hurt in a car crash, there's a section in the standard auto policy, it's section B of the standard auto policy, under which you have what can be referred to as no fault benefits. In other words, no matter whose fault it is, if you're hurt in a car crash, even if you caused it, your own car insurance company has benefits available for you, so you can get some physio or massage or chiro or what have you. Also, if you're off work more than a week, no matter whose fault the accident is, your own Section B benefits will cover you. Nothing for the first week, but after that, up to $600 a week for 2 years, or 80% of what your weekly wage is, whichever is less. So you have that coverage no matter whose fault it is. But if the accident isn't your fault, then I mean those Section B benefits aren't going to cover all of your losses. But under Section A of the at-fault driver's policy, which is the liability part of the policy, you can recover all of the money that's going to make you whole again, at least financially. And so if you make $1,000 a week and you're getting your $600 a week from Section B, the other side's insurance company is going to have to throw that other $400 at you. Plus your out-of-pocket expenses, and plus a chunk of change for your pain and suffering.
Okay. Now, so just to be clear, I want to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. If
Yes.
I was to get injured and it wasn't my fault, then
Yes.
I would have the opportunity to avail myself of the Section B benefits, which my insurance company pays for, as well as if I decided to go after the other person.
Correct. Right. So the Section A benefits of the other guy's insurance company is going to pay you for your pain and suffering, your income loss, minus whatever your Section B benefits have paid for your income loss, so that you're not being, double compensated. Out-of-pocket expenses, loss of homemaking capacity, future care costs, etc. So that's the system today. That if you get hurt in a car crash and it's not your fault, you are going to be, well, if you get a good lawyer like yours truly, you're going to be fairly compensated by the other guy's car insurance company.
You're good with the plugs, sir. And I mean, I'm just doing some back of the napkin math here.
Yeah.
But if one was to only have the Section B, the no fault benefits, that is, if I'm getting it right, 31,000 and roughly $200 per year, which is only slightly above the poverty line. So for somebody who suffered a significant injury, that's not great.
I guess not. No, not for income loss. It would be pretty crappy. But there's up to $50,000 in benefits for reimbursement for medical expenses. Again, obviously, if you don't incur those sorts of medical expenses, or as is often the case, if your insurance company decides, you know what, we're going to get a second opinion from our special doctor to see if you still need that treatment, then nobody gets 50 grand in those benefits. Similarly, of course, insurance companies don't like shelling out that $600 a week. That's quite a lot for an insurance company like Intact, for example, whose CEO only made $15.2 million last year. So again, they'll send you to their special doctor, and that doc is going to say, "I have not seen a more healthy specimen in my office in years. You are ready to go back to work. Congratulations, you're cured."
So that's where we are right now. That's how the system works right now. Is there anything else about how things work right now that people should know to sort of be able to contrast what we're going to talk about next?
Well, I would say this, that and it won't be shocking to hear that insurance companies like to make profit, and so in their case, they do it by collecting as much as they can from Albertans in premiums, paying out as little as they can get away with in claims. And when they take those premiums in, they're not going to have to pay those premiums out in claims for a number of years down the road. And so, of course, they invest your premium money, and that's where the big bucks are, from investments of accumulated capital and the premiums that go in before they have to pay them out in claims. Now, because car insurance companies don't like paying people, that's where us lawyers come in. You get rear-ended by some guy on the streets, and give me a call. I'm going to get in touch with that other side's insurance company, and I'm going to say to them, listen, you're going to pay my guy fair compensation for his injuries, or I'm going to drag you into court, and a judge is going to make you pay what's fair, plus the court costs, plus the cost of your defense lawyer at $500 or $600 an hour. And for that reason, when an injured person is dealing with the other side's insurance company and they have a lawyer, that insurance company is probably just going to cough up fair compensation and save all those legal costs that we've heard about from the insurance industry, and from Nate Horner in the last couple of days. 99 in my experience, and like I say, I've been in this biz since 92 or 95 with my own under my own label. And I've done thousands of these cases, and 99+% of these cases settle out of court. But if you have a lawyer, they settle for fair compensation. Quite frankly, if you're not represented by counsel, the other side's insurance company is going to pay you pennies on the dollar.
I think it's also important to highlight before we move on to the next part of the conversation. One of the issues that has been an ongoing conversation in regards to the cost of living in the province of Alberta has been insurance is expensive. It's disproportionately expensive for vehicle insurance and most of the other insurance things, if I'm not wrong, to the rest of Canada. Albertans just pay more in insurance. Is that, am I getting that right?
It's pretty darn close. We are right up there. Ontario actually has the highest car insurance rates. They have a privately delivered, primarily no-fault system, which is what the Alberta government is thinking. Well, that's a great idea. We should go to that system. And as I say, Ontario has that, and it's actually the highest rates in the country. However, Alberta is number 2 in terms of the average auto insurance rate. And it's a tort law province. In other words, you have the right to full and fair compensation if you're hurt by a negligent driver. And so I would argue you get what you pay for. But I would add that since April of 2019, the average compulsory premium, so not including like collision coverage and optionals, the average compulsory auto insurance premium has gone up from $800 a year in April of 2019 to $1,080 a year in 2023. That's the most recent stats we have. So that's a 35% hike that coincides with the election of Jason Kenney and the UCP. Kenney, of course, his campaign manager was a guy by the name of Nick Koolsbergen, who immediately became the chief lobbyist for the Insurance Bureau of Canada. Kenney's press secretary, Celeste Power, is the president of the Insurance Bureau of Canada. And so those lobbyists have done really well for the Alberta auto insurance industry, because while those premiums have gone up 35% since the UCP took office, bodily injury claims costs, which you've heard from the government and from the insurance lobbyists, has gone through the roof. Well, it's gone all the way from $493 per insured vehicle in 2019 to $453 in 2023. So actually, it's gone down by about 8%.
I was going to say, like, that sounds like a lower
It
number.
sounds a little bit lower. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Well, as I always say, there are lies, damn lies, and insurance lobby talking points. They're usually dutifully parroted by the finance minister of the day if he's wearing UCP colors, unfortunately.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about statistics is that if the classic joke is if you tilt your head just right and you squint your eye, then you can see just about anything you want to in any set of statistics.
Bingo.
So that's where we are. Where are we going to? Because there's been a lot of media reports about the removal of the ability for Albertans to seek compensation through the court system. And there's also some talks about some premium increases. So can you walk us through what the changes are?
Yep, you bet. And Naheed Nenshi, the NDP leader, has said, you know what, this looks like the worst possible option for Albertans. Yeah, he's right. He's absolutely right. So what's going to happen? And this, of course, is Danielle Smith and Nate Horner had a presser yesterday, and they said, and by the way, and what they said reminded me a lot of a Rick Mercer video where he's running RMR insurance brokers. And so if you look up on YouTube, Rick Mercer insurance brokers, it's a hilarious video. Or you can just watch that presser yesterday that the premier and the finance minister did, because it's basically the same video. In essence, what both of those videos say is, Alberta, premiums will be going up. However, your rights will be disappearing, and we are going to replace those rights with benefits that aren't worth the paper that they're written on. And so if I can break that down, in next year, 2025, what this year's rate cap for good drivers is 3.7%. And so they're going to roughly double that in a little bit, up to 7.5% in 2025, 7.5% in 2026. And then in 2027, which I think is an election year, they claim they're going to reduce rates for Alberta drivers. But you might recall that last year, 2023, the finance minister at the time, Travis Taves, decided to freeze auto insurance premiums for everybody. So it was a 0% cap on insurance premiums. And guess what? Insurance premiums went up 5.25% last year under the 0% for everybody rate cap. How could that possibly be? Well, guess what? There's small print and there's loopholes. And so it didn't quite apply to everybody, and a whole bunch of people got hosed. So if you can imagine that rates went up 5.25% in 2023 under a 0% rate cap, I'm going to guess that they're going up a little more than 3.7% in 2024, given that that rate cap is only for good drivers. And then, as you know, the small print is, well, good drivers, as long as you don't move down the block, or as long as you don't switch vehicles, or obviously as long as you don't get an offender bender, and as long as you don't switch insurance companies and yada yada. That's the 3.7% good driver rate. Now they've basically doubled that to 7.5% for 2025, another 7.5% for 2026. And all of this, by the way, of course, is compounded. And so I would anticipate that the average Alberta motorist by about 2027, which is when this new no fault is supposed to come into effect, we're going to already be looking at about $400+ a year on average, extra insurance costs, car insurance costs, up to that point. Well, that Nate Horner sent out a tweet this morning. He says that just happens to be the amount that we're going to then take off the average Albertan's auto insurance premium in 2027. So isn't that great? And the answer is, well, it's not that great. Number one, because even if that were the case, we would just be back to even. But the devil's in the details. And what I think is going to happen is in 2027, after good drivers have seen these 7.5% increases in each of the previous 2 years, and unless, like I say, they move or get a new vehicle, or they get a new insurance company, or they get an accident, in which case it's going to be a whole hell of a lot higher. They are in 2027 also going to see an increase in their premiums, let's say about $125 a year. The bad drivers in 2027, given that they are not going to be responsible anymore for their insurance companies aren't going to be responsible anymore for compensating people that those reckless drivers injure, their rates are going to go way down. They're going to plummet by, let's say, $2,500 a year, which is a pile of money. If they're at $5,000 and it gets cut in half, that's a pretty sweet savings. Bad drivers under that new program will still be paying more than the good drivers. However, the 80% of the good drivers that see $125 a year increase, they're going to be subsidizing those bad drivers who have that $2,500 a year decrease, the 20% of the bad drivers. But if you crunch those numbers, yeah, it averages out to a $400 a month a decrease for the average Alberta motorist. And as I said, I think in a press release yesterday, good luck selling that to the 80% of Albertans who in October of 2027, when the next election comes around, takes a look and says, you know what, I am paying a shit ton, if you'll excuse my French, of car insurance premiums more than I did back in 2024. And I don't have the right to sue somebody if I get hurt in a car crash. Now, Nate Horner and Danny Smith are going to say, yeah, but look at these gold-plated no-fault benefits we're offering you. but they're not worth the paper they're written on, because what insurance companies are going to do is what insurance companies do. They're going to send you into their special doctor who's going to say, you're all better. You don't need any treatment anymore. And when you say, BS, I sure as heck do, they're going to say, why don't you sue me? But you can't, because the UCP just took lawyers out of the equation.
There's so much to unpack there. I want to make sure I understand this correctly.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, here's the first thing that I think we need to highlight. The cost of living crisis that people are experiencing is happening not in 2027, not in 2028, not in 2029. It's happening today. The
Yeah.
the insurance rates that people are having to pay, good drivers are having to pay, are exorbitant right now, and is second highest in the country.
Yeah.
So if our baseline is, well, this is bad, and we're talking about at least, heavy emphasis on the at least, a 20% increase in insurance prices over the next 3 years, that is making a situation that is already untenable and making it more untenable, which is a fascinating approach to affordability. But I also want to just make sure I understand this correctly. We have seen insurance hikes, despite the fact that there was a cap that was put back on insurance. Um, so despite the fact that there was a cap, insurance rates still went up. So these numbers, this 3.75, 7.5, 7.5, those are um not hard numbers, I'll say. So it's entirely conceivable that a good number of Alberta drivers could see rate increases well in excess of that 3.75, 7.5, 7.5. Get where I'm going. Am I getting this
Absolutely.
right?
Yes, absolutely. And the proof's in the pudding. Like I say, last year, 2023, there was a 0% rate freeze, that wasn't just a good driver rate freeze. It was an all driver rate freeze, but it was all drivers except for a bunch of them. And and the stats came out. The Auto Insurance Rate Board did their final report just the end of September on 2023 numbers, and they said, oh yeah, so rates year over year went up 5.25% from 2022 to 2023, and bodily injury claims costs dropped 2.65%. And again, the reason I, as an injury lawyer, point out that the injury claims costs dropped when these premiums are rising is, of course, because the insurance lobby, and as I say, this is dutifully parroted by bureaucrats in the finance department and the minister of finance, and sadly the premier as well. They always claim the reason that rates are going so high is these out of control car accident injury claims. Simple math, basic math. Well, it would be if it was true, but it's not. And the stats are out there, and the stats, it's not like some injury lawyer crunching numbers on the back of a napkin. It's the Auto Insurance Rate Board that's in charge of making sure that these car insurance companies don't gouge people. And between you and me, and I hope nobody else is listening, the Auto Insurance Rate Board does a crappy job. They've done a very, very bad job of, well, basically since 2019. And in fairness, insurance companies made a ton of money during COVID because a lot less people were driving, so they weren't having to pay out a lot of claims. But here's something they could have done: reduced our rates. Instead, they raised them, and they raised them by a bunch.
And this is the other thing that I want to make sure that I understand. Um, Talking about the the bad drivers will see those big rate reductions, and the good drivers may or may not. There's some. It seems, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly,
Yeah,
it seems kind of like what you're saying is the government of Alberta is saying, hey, we're going to charge everybody $10. We're going to charge everybody $10 this year, but next year, let's say we're going to charge 10 people. I'll make the math easy. We're going to charge 10 people $10.
yeah,
But next year, we're going to be giving back $20 to we're going to give back $20. But what they're not
yeah.
saying is that only two of those people are getting back the $20.
Pretty much. That is exactly right. But when you average it out, That's the great thing about stats. When you average it out, everybody got a few bucks in their jeans, didn't they? Well, no. A couple of people got all that money and everybody else had to pay for it.
And is there a concern as well? Like, here's my thing. When if I'm looking at the demerit system that we have, and if I'm looking at the things that get reported to my insurance company, for me, one of the things that keeps me from doing a buck 80 on the QE2 is the awareness of if I get demerits, my insurance company will hear about that, my insurance rates will go up.
Yeah.
Um, and if we're saying to Joe Bad Driver, hey, we're going to drop your insurance by 2,500 bucks a year because you pay exorbitant rates because you're a crap driver. Um, that to me almost seems to disincentive disincentivize following the rules. Am I wrong?
Not well, yeah, you're absolutely right. And the problem with that, and a couple of leading economists, Jack Mintz and Christopher Bruce, have pointed out that yeah, when you give bad drivers a break on their car insurance premiums and tell them, don't worry, it doesn't much matter anymore if you smash into somebody because your insurance company doesn't have to pay your victims anymore. It reduces the incentives to drive carefully. Well, what that does is it increases car accidents and injuries and fatalities. And if the UCP doesn't consider a bunch of dead Albertans to be more than merely acceptable collateral damage, maybe they'll listen to this. Increased car accidents, injuries, and fatalities increases premiums. And so these bad drivers who get a break in their rates so that Nate Horner can say, hey, look, the average Albertan in 2027 saw a $400 deduction in their car insurance premiums. Well, those rates are going to go up. In other words, these are temporary reductions. The studies have shown that when jurisdictions implement no-fault insurance, the inevitable result is increased road carnage, which leads to increased auto insurance premiums again. So it's a very temporary reduction in premiums.
Well, if the only province that's beating Alberta for insurance costs is one of the provinces that has no fault insurance, I mean that's a fascinating uh, case to try to use to justify making this change. But I just want to clarify something that you said in there
Yeah.
because this, I'm sorry, Jack Mintz isn't on board with this.
Isn't that something? No, Jack Mintz, what basically he put out a report last month. It's called Alberta's Vehicle Insurance Options by Jack Mintz, School of Public Policy, University of Calgary, October 11th of 24. And he said, you know what the Alberta government should do if they're conservative, they should stop acting like tax and spend liberals and scrap the insurance premium tax. Every Albertan pays this hidden 4% insurance premium tax on their policies. And what Jack Mintz has said is if the government is actually not a bunch of tax and spend liberals, if they're more than conservative in name only, and we heard that yesterday, Nate Horner saying, hey, guess what? We're doing pretty good on the budget. We're going to rake in $78 billion in revenues this year. We're going to have a $4.6 billion surplus. But yeah, we don't want to part with wetting our beak on your insurance premiums. Jack Mintz says, yeah, why don't you reduce, scrap he says in his report, reduce or scrap outright the insurance premium tax. The Insurance Bureau talks about reversing that 60% hike this year in the health cost recovery levy that the Alberta government puts on insurers, and that's passed on to policyholders. And the other thing Mintz suggests is with respect to people who suffer minor injuries in a car accident, which is, according to the insurance industry, about 80% of claims, take those minor injuries out of tort. So if you suffer a minor whiplash, sprain, strain, and it heals relatively quickly, which is 80% of claims, and those are the claims that are subject to that minor injury regulation that came in 20 years ago, take those ones out of tort and say to Albertans, listen, if you want to be insured for those minor injuries, we'll let you buy that coverage from your own car insurance company. That all of those would drop the average Albertan's premium by about $325 a year. And I think the other thing the insurance industry has said is get rid of this grid system where there's a cap on the maximum you can charge the bad drivers. Get rid of that or modify it so that the good drivers are not over subsidizing the rates of the bad drivers. And that saves another like $65 a year for good Alberta motorists. And so Mintz and I've put out some policy suggestions too. These are suggestions that would save good drivers money on their car insurance premiums. I'll be honest, the bad drivers, they're going to see their rates go up under those sorts of policies. But you know what? I don't feel too bad about them because they're driving really crappy. I think they should learn to drive better or maybe get a bus pass.
I'm just I'm just tripping on the fact that like even Jack Mintz is condemning this move. Like that just I'm gonna need a minute.
It's goofy. This is what's really goofy. Even the insurance lobbyists weren't asking for this no fault nonsense. The insurance lobbyists were basically saying kind of what Mintz was saying. Well, full disclosure, guess what? Mintz wrote his report last year because he was commissioned by the Insurance Bureau of Canada, right? And so, as you can well imagine, the Insurance Bureau of Canada thinks that he wrote a really good report, and it has a bunch of suggestions that they vigorously support. None of them were bring in no faults. In fact, the Insurance Bureau of Canada has said no fault is a really crappy system. I think one of the reasons that the insurance lobby does not want no fault to come in is because they know what's going to happen. As I've suggested, I've predicted that this privately delivered no fault proposal that the government has brought in is mutually assured destruction for injury lawyers like poor old me, for the UCP government in 3 years when they can't come October of 2027 deliver what they are alleging that this new policy is going to do, and then for the private auto insurers because Premier Nenshi is going to kick their butts out of the province and put in a public government insurer.
So it sounds like just about everybody except for Daniel Smith and Nate Horner think this is a bad idea. Why are they doing it?
They're bureaucrats. The bureaucrats in the Department of Finance have been hot. I was going to say have hard-ons for, but I don't want to say that. So I'll say they've been hot for no-fault insurance for at least 4 or 5 years. Ever since they hired this auto insurance advisory commission to give them recommendations on what should we do. Basically, what should we do to get the lowest average auto insurance premium, and not surprisingly, the lowest average auto insurance premium is available if you just remove claims and frankly also remove profit. In other words, boot the private insurers out of the system and have a nonprofit government insurer. And so given that C in the UCP is supposed to be conservative, they say, well, we wouldn't want to, I'm not in the business of starting crown corporations here, so we can't do the public insurance thing. But that other stuff about bringing in the no fault, let's see if we can have the tiniest average car insurance premium that we can within a privately delivered system. And the bureaucrats have said, I think you guys should do this. And the funny thing about bureaucrats is elections come and go, but those bureaucrats seem to stay there, and they're just hot for no fault. And they managed. They weren't able to bamboozle CC in 2015 or frankly even Taves in 2020, but they've managed to convince this farmer from Stettler that this is just a really super idea, and I think it's a big mistake.
It's wild to me because, like, at the end of the day, it sounds like, in effect, and I'm going to oversimplify this, but it
Yeah,
sounds like, in effect, like if we're talking about the average, if everybody in Alberta is paying, let's play made up numbers, $150 a month for insurance. And there's that one guy who keeps driving over people's lawns and running over their pets and doing rear enders, and he's paying $5,000 a month in insurance.
yeah,
The average insurance rate is pretty quickly gonna, be $3,000, even though it's just that one dude. And so
bingo.
if you
Yeah,
take that dude's insurance and you go, no, 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 we're only going to make it $2,500 by getting rid of those extreme cases that are extreme because they're extremely bad drivers,
yeah,
you're going to knock the average insurance rate down. But for everybody else, like you can boil the frog, you can increase it by 7% a year. Let's just pull a number out of the ether. Um, and people won't notice. Do you think people should be taking a look at what their insurance rates are today and like putting a reminder in their phone for like 2027 to come up and be like, man, I did get screwed.
well, I'll tell you, if I were advising the NDP, I would be telling the NDP you absolutely should be telling people to do that because that's going to sell in a campaign is to say, are you better off today than you were back in November of 2024 when Danielle Smith and Nate Horner took that podium and announced this great new made in Alberta privately delivered no fault system. Uh, because the answer most Albertans are going to give is oh hell no, we're not. We're getting hosed in 2027 compared to 2024.
And it's important to highlight. I don't remember, please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember this being something that Danielle Smith and the UCP campaigned on. So this kind of seems to fall into the category of yet another thing that they campaigned on that they didn't campaign on,
Yeah,
that they're just executing because surprise.
yeah, and frankly, what surprises me about the whole thing is that they didn't implement something within the first half of their mandate, right? Because usually, political parties, if they're going to do something really freaking stupid, that's maybe going to add some well-moneyed interests, donations in their party coffers, but overall, it's really bad for Albertans. They're going to do that long before the next election so that it's not fresh in people's minds. And I think the only thing I think, why on earth are they doing this? I think that Nate Horner really is buying from his bureaucrats that this is going to reduce premiums for most Albertans, and that just ain't true. He's going to be able to sell that between January of 2027 and October of 2027, the average premium's gone down because a bunch of bad drivers are going to get some hefty rebate checks. But he's not going to be able to sell that to people who know that, well, I didn't get a refund. My rates went up again, and they went up last year, and they went up a butt ton the year before. And I don't actually have any benefits that accompanies that purchase that I made. I'm not. All these injury lawyers are telling me I don't have the right to sue anymore, and which is, by the way, true. And unless, by the way, apparently, unless somebody's committed a crime in the commission of causing you injuries, which is hilarious because I guess the pitch is that the only people that they're going to need liability insurance in 2027, of course, are criminals. Nobody else is going to be held liable for car accidents except criminals. Can you imagine an insurance company saying, "Oh yes, we sell liability insurance to criminals so that if you commit a crime and hurt somebody in the commission of a crime on the roads, we'll cover you. Don't worry about it." So clearly that's not what's going to happen. So then what on earth does Nate Horner mean when he says, "Oh, don't worry. If somebody commits a crime, you'll still have the right to sue that guy if he hurts you on the road"? I guess what it means is you can go after that criminal personally and get a judgment against him. And then good luck collecting, right?
Well, and like, I'm curious what the definition of a crime is in that context, because like if you run a red light, you're breaking the law.
No, no. What they mean is a criminal offense, like an impaired,
Looking at the criminal
obviously a
code.
criminal code offense, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay, so you can break the little laws. That's fine. Just
Yeah,
don't
it's not
break.
a Highway Traffic Act offense, or I guess it's called a Traffic Safety Act offense. Yeah, I hope not. Yeah, I mean, I don't like to consider myself a criminal. I did a rolling stop through a four-way stop sometime in the last 4 years. I know because it was at the right near the house that I have owned for the last 4 years or so, and I got a $407 ticket. Now that does not make me a criminal, but it does make me a violator of that Traffic Safety Act policy on that one occasion. The
I
one
almost wonder,
time
like,
I ever did it.
there's no shortage of stories of like UCP ministers having problems with driving. There's certainly been rumors about, folks like Devin Dreeshen. Casey Madhu famously was caught speeding through a playground zone. I wonder what Nate Horner's driving record looks like if that's part of the
I,
motivation.
I have no idea what it. Well, it's funny that you say that because, of course, I got in some trouble 20 odd years ago when I pointed out that one of the big reasons the finance minister at that time was wanting to bring rates down for the young and the reckless was because she had her son at home at the time who had not the best driving record, and she was saying, my son Troy's paying $7,000 a year in car insurance premiums. We got to reduce rates for guys like him. And so I think a really good way is to cap pain and suffering claims for injuries nothing short of catastrophic at $4,000. And she almost got away with it too, except in October of 2003 when she made that pitch. The day before she was gonna pitch that to caucus, there was a columnist from the Calgary Herald by the name of Danielle Smith, and Danielle Smith said, "What? Cap rates for people with catastrophic or injuries just short of catastrophic? That would be immoral. That would be unjust. Wouldn't that violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? You can't do that." And the next day, people in caucus read Danielle Smith's column, and they voted Pat Nelson's proposal down by one vote. Like Lukashuk and Rathgaber in caucus back then voted it down by one vote, and Pat Nelson had to go back to the drawing board and came back a year later in October of 2004, passed a minor injury reg on whiplash and soft tissue injuries that heal relatively quickly within about 3 to 6 months, and that remains in place today. So a little trivia about Danielle Smith and how hypocrisy, thy name is Marlena.
So I just there's so much there. Uh, I just want to double check that it would not be without historical precedent to suggest that a minister would pursue this policy because it would directly benefit a family member. Um,
In fairness, to be fair, considering that I got dinged by the Law Society when I kind of said that, to be fair, she said that, I think by way of example, my son pays a lot in car insurance premium. I'm
okay,
not suggesting that the reason that she brought in insurance reform was to lower her son's rates. I think she was
gotcha.
using it as an example. Um,
Wild coincidence was
yeah,
all.
it's an absolute wild coincidence. It's as wild a coincidence as the fact that Saskatchewan has no fault insurance. And so, for example, if you if you're a drunk driver, if sometimes you accidentally kill somebody on the road, then be you're not going to be liable to your victims for car insurance. By the way, anything about Scott Moe's driving record?
I've heard some things.
Yeah.
But I also want to just double check as I continue to unpack that whole little package that you dropped there.
Yeah.
Daniel Smith was historically against no fault insurance, and her column condemning no fault insurance was one of the reasons why it didn't get pursued.
Isn't that just the funniest thing? Yeah.
I think I almost wonder some days if it would be the easiest way to take a look at where the UCP government is going to go is to take a look at Daniel Smith's historical record before she didn't win her nomination and just reverse all of it because that seems to be the track record
It's
there.
it's kind of like, I don't know, George Costanza, where you do one day she just decided maybe if I just do the opposite of everything that I've done before, maybe that'll work better for me. And I really don't think it's gonna. I think I wrote in a column in I think it was in the Journal earlier this month that a decade ago Danielle Smith was 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 one of the key components in allowing the NDP to become the government for the first time ever. You'll recall that in December of 2014, she was the leader of the opposition. She crossed the floor to join the PC party just a few months before the 2015 election, and that was pretty key, I think, in allowing Rachel Notley and the NDP to become government for the first time in that party's history. And I think that this privately delivered no fault suggestion might very well give the NDP a chance to repeat as government in 2027.
All right. So I just want to make sure that I understand the high level picture. I'm going to try to do a too long didn't read here. In essence, these changes are going to result in higher premiums on an ongoing basis for good drivers. They're
Yeah.
going to potentially result in lower premiums for terrible drivers.
On a
And
temporary basis for
yeah,
terrible drivers. Yeah.
and they're going to remove the ability for good drivers to seek remediation through the courts when they have interactions with those bad drivers who are now getting lower insurance rates.
Yes. Now the trade-off for all of that on the bad side is they're going to offer gold-plated no-fault benefits. The only problem is nobody's going to actually get those benefits. And so, as I've said, I've been doing this for over 30 years. 20 years ago, I was fighting this minor injury cap stuff. One thing that the government of the day brought in 2004 is they said, okay, we're capping minor injuries at $4,000 for pain and suffering, but we are taking those Section B no fault benefits that people have right now, and we're increasing the medical expense payment limit from $10,000 up to $50,000. So on paper, that looked really good. Guess what? Payouts under Section B went down by 10% after they increased it from 10 grand to 50 grand because they weren't really actually going to pay that. By the way, I should also mention, just for funsies, that when they brought in that minor injury cap, which made it, again, somewhat of an incentive or reduce the incentive somewhat of bad drivers to drive better, fatalities on the roads went up 20% the very next year. And over the next 5 years, Transport Canada confirmed that auto accidents increased in each and every of those 5 years on a straight numbers basis, but also on a per capita basis, each and every year over the next 5 years. And that was just a cap on minor soft tissue injuries. No fault's a cap on everything.
I just like when people say gold plated, I think about back when I was younger, the number of times that I bought like gold plated jewelry or something, and eventually the gold plating wore off, and I just got an uncomfortable rash from the metal that was underneath. It seems like that might be an apt
It's
metaphor.
it is a very apt metaphor, and so what the government said yesterday in the presser, right? Danielle and the two other Nates, Newdorf and Horner, were saying that this is modeled basically primarily on Manitoba, except of course for that public insurance part, because that would be socialist. But here's the thing about Manitoba. So I've got the stats here, and Manitoba has one of these fantastic gold-plated on paper no fault benefits things where you can get up to a bajillion zillion dollars for this, that, and the other thing, treatment costs, et cetera, et cetera. So these are 2022 stats, okay? But the average premium in Alberta 2022 was, and this includes collision coverage and all of this, the average premium was $1,587 a year. and the average claim size in Alberta was a little north of 12 grand, $12,309. Now in Manitoba, the average premium was about $400 less, $1,193 a year, but their average payout under this gold-plated no-fault system is $4,600. Now, I guess the question then becomes, how do you reduce premiums under a no-fault system if under no fault, doesn't matter whose fault it is, everybody gets money? And the answer is everybody gets a whole bunch less money because that's the only way you can do it. And that leads to the reality that Danielle Smith and Nate Horner have said, this is your last chance, you private auto insurance, you little scoundrels. If you don't reduce the average premium for Albertans by the time, the next election rolls around, we might have to think about this public auto insurance option. Now, I'll tell you this, if I'm a private auto insurer, I'm not too worried about the UCP actually bringing in public auto, but I am really worried about the UCP getting defeated and Naheed Nenshi and the NDP bringing in public auto. So I'm going to do whatever I can to try to reduce those premiums and at the same time be able to say to the shareholders, we're still making a shit ton of profit. Well, how do you do that? The only way you can do that is pay out diddly squat in claims. And so what they're going to do in terms of expenses is they're going to head to Staples and they're going to buy a bunch of those denied stamps. And that's going to be their expense in 2027. There is no way you're going to get paid more than 3 months worth of physio treatments in 2027 if you get hurt in a car crash, whether it's your fault or not. You're going to go in, you're going to get a few treatments, and then your insurance company is going to say, well, you know what, the small print on this new policy says that as long as these treatments are continuing to give you a measurable benefit, you can keep these going and getting these treatments, and we'll cover you. But our special doctor doesn't think it's going to give you a measurable benefit anymore. So we're going to cut you off. And
Gotcha.
we're going to do it.
Well, all delightful. So everything's bad.
So yeah, all is bad. All is bad.
Perfect.
Well, no, in fairness, bad drivers, I think, are going to see for a very limited time only in 2027 a pretty sweet reduction in their premiums. So I think honestly, if I were a bad driver, I would probably be happy with this announcement yesterday, and not coincidentally, as I say, that about 20% of the province is bad drivers, and about 20% of Albertans in polls say no fault's a good idea. The other roughly 60% that are decided on the issue say yeah, no fault's a terrible idea. It goes against good Albertan values of rights and responsibilities and accountability. Heck, even Nate Horner was revealing that poll that the government did and said, I think it was over 70% of Albertans think that bad drivers should be accountable to good drivers and to their victims through their insurers to compensate them for injuries. And then you'll remember. In yesterday's presser, Nate then said, but we also asked them, if we could guarantee you that your insurance company was going to treat you fairly and give you full compensation, would you need lawyers anymore? And 60% of them said, no, we wouldn't need lawyers anymore if that happened. So,
wow. Multi-billion-dollar
and that pretty much formed the basis of their decision yesterday.
I'm curious if they would have included in that question. Obviously, they didn't, but I'm curious if they would have included in that question. And we're somehow going to get all of these companies to forego their fiduciary duty to their stakeholders and instead just worry about all y'all. Do you believe that's possible? Because I speaking for myself, I do not. What a wonderful episode this is. Mark McCourt, is there anything else you want people to know? Is there anything else you want people to hear?
Well, I mean, I will tell you that I don't come on to just say, man, they did a crappy job and be the critic. I had suggested a whole bunch of ideas, of course, that with to reform auto insurance within the existing tort law system that would save the average good Alberta driver something like $325 to $385 a year, and which could be implemented much more quickly than wait until January 2027. I would love to think that Danielle Smith could learn something from old King Ralph. I remember back in about '97. King Ralph, I think his Justice Minister, John Havelock, at the time, introduced a bill and said, you know what, we're going to cap compensation for the involuntarily sterilized. And Pam Barrett, who was the NDP leader at the time, just ripped them a new one in the ledge that day. And the very next day, Ralph Klein said, you know what, that was a really bad idea. I crapped the bed on that one. I'm sorry, Albertans. We're withdrawing that. And that's one thing that Ralph used to be able to do is he would make a boo-boo and then he would quickly say, you know what, screwed up on that one. Sorry about that. And we're changing course. I would like to think Danielle Smith, I assume that she watches your show religiously. If she sees this episode, I'd like to think she's going to say, you know what? Yeah, we gotta fire those bureaucrats in Treasury Board and Finance, and let's go with McCourt's plan, and maybe we'll double check with Jack Mintz if that's okay.
I would love it if that was the case, but I find that as much as Danielle Smith loves to invoke Ralph Klein, the memory that comes to mind for me far more often is the debate where somebody else tried to invoke a politician, and the response from the other person was, "I knew Jack Kennedy, and you, sir, are no Jack Kennedy." So do with that what you will.
That was
Mr.
totally uncalled for.
Mr. McCourt, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. If anybody wants to learn more, do you have the socials? Are you still on the X? Are you part of the Exodus or?
Yeah. I think I'm at McCourt Law on Twitter, so you can follow me there. That's probably your best bet. I was throwing an elbow at Nate Horner, so until Elon takes me down, I will be there on X, I guess it's called now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat today, sir.
Yeah, good talking to you, Nate. Thanks.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdowns audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.